kind of what we call the empathy pillars in the book, you really can't get what the other person is thinking. And until you get that and you really see that and see how many thousands of times those kinds of discontinuities and cognitive dissonance is happening in your company, I really don't believe anything will change. Which is sad because I wrote a book about wanting to see a change. But I mean, then that's why it's kind of, it's not like a lot of books on customer and employee experience. That's the title, right? And we picked a title about the thing that we think would solve it. And so it's kind of like a hidden message. And the idea is empathy is sitting in someone else's shoes. And then the action part is actually with that new perspective and that new understanding. Now, how would you act differently? And what did you learn? And how could you do kind of this continuous listen, understand, act, learn? We call it the OODA loop, really, which is from John Boyd, who was a fighter pilot, which he's a student of Deming, which is like, if you don't take that feedback and integrate it back into what you're doing, the feedback is meaningless. It doesn't really change anything. And, Marshall, you and I were at many conferences when social started to come into the kind of CRM, contact center, customer experience world. And so what's really cool is that social really started to help us see the world through other people's eyes.
Yeah, that's when the phrase voice of the customer actually started to mean something.
Yeah, it's right. And I think what happens is, at least my experience in corporate America, is that there's the people who are interfacing at the contact center, who are talking to customers, or the people in the stores, right? And you see this a lot, like in the TV show Undercover Boss, where you see the people on the front line and they're doing stuff, right? And then you have a CEO come in, or CEO come in and in disguise and actually do the job, and they're like, wow, how can we do this to our people? What were we thinking, right? And there's so many layers between the person who's actually accomplishing something or talking to the customer and the person who's running the company. And there's like I call it like kind of like this cumulus insulation layer, and there's layers of people who want to manage up and want to be seen, like as a good player, instead of saying, hey, we have an issue here and here's 3 ways we could solve it, right? Never go to your boss with a problem without 3 solutions, and pick and know which one you want to pick to implement, because they don't have time to do the analysis, right? So you want to just be a problem presenter, but you want to be a solution presenter. But I really think that, what's happened in corporate America is there's so much insulation that we just don't really see or get that feedback. I was watching, I love Hallmark Channel, I'll admit it. And on Sunday nights, there's a show called When Calls the Heart. And it's about this little tiny frontier town. And I've watched the series over a number of years now, and it was like a little tiny town. And now the town has a soda fountain and a pharmacist, and they just started a newspaper. I mean, it's so adorable, right? It's like the beginnings of a town and these little tiny companies, but everybody's on the street talking to each other. And it's so tiny that they can yell across the street, right? So like, there's no layers of management. There's no like big buildings in the way. It's like people are talking to each other, or saying, I really like that soda, or, walking into the doctor's office and like having conversations that are personal, because the doctor who happens to work in the town knows everybody, right? So I think that we've gotten so far away from knowing our employees and our customers and our businesses. And I mean, that's a conundrum, right? If you want to be really successful and you want to grow a company, how do you grow it and still stay in touch? And I think that's a cultural thing that there was someone, maybe it was the guy who wrote The Tipping Point. I think you can only really manage about 150 people in your radius, and then relationships start to get strained. So if there's a way to start to look at how are we interfacing with each other, and how do we really transform those relationships? And, again, I have a bunch of cartoons in the book, which I picked and I chuckled very hard at some of them because I experienced them personally. Like especially they're not invented here. Like if you bring any ideas, just know that they're not going to be used or something. It's like, okay, wait a minute. We're paying people $10 to bring their whole selves to work. We They do it. You don't use it, and so then they kind of like, well, why bother? So you're really paying $6, but you think you're getting $10 worth of work. Like it's just, I don't know. It's like what I really want to accomplish is have authentic conversations like this where we're actually saying out loud what's happening.
It
That
would be
is, yeah, that's
So
exactly the aspect, such as I perfectly understand that from that perspective, bridging that gap of what the CEO thinks they are achieving and what the customer really has in its hand or feels from the bottom of his heart are so different since 2022 years ago when they did some of these checks and they did more checkups. And I was just wondering because I talked to my eldest son and my two other sons, which are in ISAC, which is a students' organization, and they are very much in communication and bringing people together and prevent things like war by communication. And with a lot of organizations, they were really, really lucky and fortunate. Now, they were the guys which are in conflict-free communication, and they said to me, empathy is a fantastic concept. And they encouraged me to go forward with empathisches CRM and with all these little bricks. It's like a Lego game. And this weekend, they said, if people take the attitude of trying to communicate conflict-free, they start a process about thinking about the people they are partnering with, the people they work with, the people they live with, and they start thinking about their attitude and what it's needed, because ISAC is a non-government organization. I was asking myself if probably the non-Wall Street gigs and big bosses and entrepreneurs, but those which are non-governmental or more startup-like, would easier adopt that new way of thinking of employee-centric, customer-centric, and to the benefit of the employee. When he is happy, he gives a completely different service to the customer.
mm-hmm.
And this is as question, would an NGO be easier to get into that attitude of thinking, or what has to happen with the business-centric ones?
Well, I think so. That's a good question. Are the most business centric ones the ones that are going to change? I don't think so. So in the very last chapter, we have what I would call something very similar to Geoffrey Moore's technology adoption curve, his chasm curve, and we
Yeah.
have the same kind of commitment curve, right? And so there's going to be the few who are going to be highly committed and really interested. But for the most part, if you look at corporate America, the early majority and the late majority don't really like change. So they're really not going to be so interested until their ship starts sinking, right? I would have thought that maybe startups would be a good place, but I just watched the TV show We Crashed, which was about WeWork.
Oh,
And that's if you haven't seen, that's really interesting. If 1/100th of that is true, which we know it was made for the viewing public, so there's dramatization of what may have really happened, but the idea was to create a community workplace, right? But there was not enough structure. So it was really all about that CEO's particular view of what the world should look like, and not necessarily, it still didn't include, even though it was all about like and we're doing this and we're doing that, it really wasn't about, like, because employees gave feedback, at least in the show, and it was ignored. So it's really, really fascinating. Like everywhere you look, you would think that, startup, it's small. So it's kind of like, little town on When Calls the Heart on my Hallmark show. It's smaller. People should be working more intimately. But part of it comes from the training and the enculturation. So I'm not necessarily talking about like what school you went to or what classes you took, but the zeitgeist of training that you were indoctrinated under. So if you grew up in a command and control, which most of us did, structure, big or little, you are used to that. You're not used to sitting and talking um, and asking people how they feel and people feeling psychologically safe to
Mhm.
say, I'm not really sure why we're doing that, or I'd like to understand that a little bit more. And I was just talking to Ariana Huffington, her head of
Yeah.
communications, Libby, and we were talking about their company and how they run things. And she said, I said, I'm going to send her a book. And I said, I'll point out some of the cultural issues that are then related to health, because Thrive is all about making corporate life better and healthier. And so I said, Libby, I'll point out, some of the ideas and concepts that are really focused on employees there. And she said, interestingly enough, here at Thrive, we would never have someone have a project implemented and then have someone later say, I don't know why we did that. It was like a really stupid decision, or nobody
Ooh.
asked me. Like that would never happen. And I'm like, wow, that that's freaking amazing, because I believe that that conversation happens every single day in almost every company where those, I really like Amy. I can't pronounce her last name, Edmondson, I think, Edmondson. She wrote the book really on psychological safety. And she really talks about this need to know that you can openly express how you feel. So one is, big, small, startup, NGO, right? I mean, you think NGO might be work because they care about the world, right? But it's
Yeah.
that the character of that person leading the company, and are they built empathetically, right? Empathy is supposed to be a skill that you can learn. So our psychologists tell us if they're really built like that, do they
Yeah.
really sit down and listen? And do they practice that? And then do the other people who work for them emulate those characteristics, right?
Mhm.
And then do you make a culture safe where it's okay to disagree, right? And
Mhm.
disagreement, people see disagreement as conflict, people see conflict as bad. What was really fascinating, and Marshall, I know you're going to remember this, is when we saw people post in social, your airline sucks, or this is terrible, or whatever horrible thing they would say. To me, I was like, oh my God, that's fantastic. People be
Yeah.
like, "What? What? That's fantastic. Can we take it down? Can we erase it? Can we go shoot this person?" Like, right? And I'm like, "No, no, no. Your customer is telling you this is not working."
Yeah, they're giving you an
No,
opportunity right
right?
here to engage them and show them that you're going to fix it.
Yeah.
Right.
That was why I
Yeah.
loved when social became an issue, became a factor in business. It's what got me to really care about CRM in the first place, was that
Yeah.
that was going to happen. I'm glad you mentioned that, because it gives me warm feelings inside to remember it.
Yeah. I mean, and we had great times, right? Like discussing and brainstorming, those of us who are in this like zeitgeist of, oh my gosh, look, the voice of the customer is spewed all over the internet, right? It's not in some CRM system or voice of the customer analytics, nice, system that now some, business intelligence girl is gonna write a report, and then it's gonna get like sat in a stack of other pieces of paper and never actually given to the people who could make a difference, either because they think it's bad, right? Or they don't have
Right.
time, or they think they don't have time, or whatever the excuses are. And so what I really loved about social was there it was, unbrazened, uh, just flat out, straight out. And to me, that's the canary in the coal mine, right? That's your customers saying, I'm frustrated, I'm upset. Now, it happens, right? There's bad weather, and then especially I traveled a couple times during COVID, and there were surges of COVID. So pilots were getting sick or testing positive. So they had to cancel flights because weather and because pilots and flight attendants couldn't come to work.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So were people mad? Yes. Did they have the right to be mad? Did they have the right to say they're mad in social? Yes. And that's the best time for those people who work at those companies to stay out and go, I got you. I'm really sorry. I hear you. Here's what's happening, right? And I remember, when our friend that worked for that cable company, I don't know if I should say who it is, but he had the same thing, right? And what he did, he was one of the first people who actually said, you know what, I'm sorry. How can I make it better? Or you know what, maybe I can't make it better, but I am sorry, right? Just acknowledging that. And so I really hoped that social was going to turn companies inside out. It started to, and then it didn't. It like that movement got stopped, and so that's
Yeah.
kind of where I picked up that feeling of really wanting to shake things up and wake people up and just say, look, you have to take this seriously.
Yeah.
Is it enough to just say I'm sorry? I mean,
Mm, sometimes yes, sometimes no.
if I'm a customer, I usually want to accomplish something. And you have got, as a company, as a business, on the other side, you've got only that many chances, unless you are Apple, probably. And I desperately wanted the new iPhone. Yeah. Then I don't have then I don't have a choice.
Right.
But usually I do. So
no, I think you're right, and I think there's two parts to that story. One is, let's say it is weather, and it's pilots getting COVID and or flight attendants, and they just can't staff it. Being transparent and genuine about what's happening, I think is important. Right? It's not going to fix the fact that you missed a wedding, or that you didn't get home for Christmas on time, or New Year's, or whatever that was. But I think a good step in the right direction is being authentic about what's happening in the business. And then one of the things that Delta did for me was they actually sent me miles. That was their thing, their apology for canceling my flight.
Yeah.
So
It's a fair approach.
it was
If you goof, yeah,
it was something, right? It was a ticket, but it was at least something, right?
yeah.
So I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, if people are saying the handle fell off my suitcase, or the door, this lock I bought, the door doesn't stay locked. When those types of posts happen, you need to respond to those. You need to take that information back to your product managers, back to the people in manufacturing, and figure out why people are having problems. Is this an isolated particular inventory lot, or is there something intrinsically about these locks that doesn't really work, and the QA, got slipped? So I think, those are the kinds of things where, if you use social listening to really listen to your customer
bingo.
and understand and predict what's going to happen, learn from it, go take the action, fix it, and then go back out there and see, did we really fix it? Again, those are the 4 empathy pillars in the book. And it's what's fascinating to me is that it's the way we designed our technology to work in the customer experience, employee experience space. But what I found was it was foundational to human communication.
Just one question, please. Could you please name the 4 pillars you mentioned in the book?
Pillows.
Pillars. They can be pillars.
Don't be mean to the person speaking the second.
I'm not going to sleep right now. I feel extremely comfortable and excited. So the pillars of empathy in action. What are the 4 you find? And then I would love to have some more insight on that magic flywheel, which is my biggest, my wow effect, the force multiplier flywheel.
Okay, so the 4 pillars. The first pillar not pillow. Although if I'm boring, go to sleep.
No, no.
Um, or maybe that's what I could do. A secondary business. I could make pillows and we could put them on the couch and people could decorate. We could put them in the
In
office.
orange with
Yeah.
branding.
Or we
It's
could-
Yes.
fantastic.
Yeah, motivational
Yeah.
messages on
Pillows.
pillows.
Or we could pillows on pillars.
That reminds me of one year when I worked at Hughes Electronics. They're no longer in business, so I'll say this out loud. They, as an employee appreciation, redecorated the elevators.
Redecorated the elevators. Wow.
We did the employee survey and they said, we hear you that you're not happy. Here's a coffee cup. And by the way, we're also redecorating the elevators. And they put like new coverings. I don't know. Because I guess people were complaining that the elevators were all beat up and slow.
Well, I guess we know why they're not in business anymore.
Raytheon bought them, but yeah.
You
just
stupid
anyway.
me, what are the pillars?
Oh, yes, the
now?
pillars. Back to the pillars. Thank
He's
you.
insisting. Sorry.
Yes, you can see my entrepreneurial brain that goes to, oh my God, I can make this. And
I'm with you.
But you know
That is
what?
my attitude.
Nobody asked me for pillows, did they? So that would be, so there I go, being opposite of what I said the world should be, is I came up with an idea that nobody wants.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say nobody wants it.
Um,
We have to test market it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes, I'd
float
have to
the
go out and
idea.
say, hey,
Yeah.
if we had the 4 pillars as pillows on the couches in the entrance to all our lobbies, would that start would that be a conversation starter?
Yeah, it
And
would.
maybe we'd do some tests and we could see. So maybe it's not a bad idea.
It is exactly that what I call the Corbian jump. Yeah. Just in the middle of a sentence or in the middle of a conversation, I jump to another topic. And my wife, it took her 33 years to nearly catch up with all these, let's say, jump and run in my brain and to follow what I'm just onto. Now, the 4 pillars are something which
Again, that.
on the
The 4
pillow.
pillars are,
Yeah.
number 1, listen. So that means sit in the seat of the other person and listen to them and hear, actually listen to what they're saying. Don't start thinking about what you want to say back or your agenda or what you want them to do or what you want them to understand. Actually sit and listen.
Yeah.
And take it in. And it may not be positive. It may hurt. You may not like it.
Yeah.
That your job is to just listen. Then take all of that information in. Number 2 is understand and predict.
Okay.
Right. So now you're like taking all that information in, you're using your experience and you're like, okay, based on what I've listened to, I'm going to predict that what you'd really like from me is you'd really like me to send you 4 pillars. Right. And so then we'd have more conversation. I would listen and understand, and we would refine that. Right. So that the point that I would take action, it would be the action that you would want me to take. And then the 4th pillar is to learn. So look at the first 3 pillars and do an ODA loop, which is the thing from John Boyd, and learn from that interaction and really start to integrate all that feedback so that that relationship gets deeper and more genuine and more authentic. And then basically you repeat.
I don't know the word ODA loop. Can you please explain ODA loop? OODA.
Yes, OODA. So it really comes from there was a fighter pilot named John Boyd, and the ODA process is something that pilots use when they have to make like millisecond decisions. So it's observe, orient, decide, act. So what I did was I said, okay, you have 4 pillars. So we're going to the diagram. So let's start with the inputs. So the inputs for empathy-based business value, that's what EBBV is, would be the first thing is you need to have some sort of corporate financial value for customers and employees. So if they're not on the balance sheet, you're not really thinking about the experience, the importance of the experience, how to improve the experience. So until that becomes part of our accounting principles,
Mhm.
it makes it really difficult for people who are trying to get budgets, even though everybody knows it's important and everybody says it's important and there are budgets. When it really comes down to it, if you're going to implement a really customer and employee focused culture, you'd have to change a lot of things. And that changing, right, from the way that we've always done things to something new costs money. So unless you can kind of work out the financial benefit of improving those experiences, it's going to, most companies are going to be really hard pressed to either convince their investors or Wall Street that they made a good decision about where they, if they have to put their money towards product or sales versus improving the customer or employee experience, current wisdom would say that doesn't make sense, but that's because they're not inside of this conversation that we're having. So number
Genau.
one is corporate financial value, right? How do you value those experiences? How do you see that they either detract or add to your profits margins and your competitive placement in the marketplace? Then the second piece is culture. And for me, culture
Yeah.
is what we talked about almost from the very beginning of our time together, which is, do employees feel safe? Do you have leaders who can lead conversations, right? That they're really listening? Are managers and leaders really, are they empowered to really make changes? Or like, let's
Yeah.
say they get a lot of feedback, can they do anything with it? Or is it just like, okay, you got to vent, but don't expect anything to change? So are we empowering leaders to make changes? Are we empowering managers to make changes? And do we make it safe for employees to say, this really isn't working, and what would be really great is if. And then I think the next piece is leadership, right? And so a lot of people would say that the fish always sinks most at the head. And what I would say is that at the end of the day, the person at the top, and we're very lucky to have Tony because he's a very good leader. The person
Yeah.
at the top sets the tone.
Genau.
And whether you have a culture where people feel safe, whether there's a culture where you can bring things up, whether it's like an entrepreneurial, innovative spirit, that really depends on the role models that leadership sets. And so oftentimes, like if I go in to talk to a customer or try to help a customer go down this path, we talk to leadership, and the way that they've always been leading doesn't really work for this new world. And so that means new skills. That means a new
Yeah.
way to communicate, right? So and also new way to do compensation, because compensation does matter, especially in the Great Resignation, where we have all had a moment to, I call it the cause for pause, which let us all reflect on what's really important in our lives and what we want to do with it. And then the last piece is the technology that we use to be able to deliver, the work that we do
Yeah.
as employees, right? Is that cumbersome? Is it easy? And it's not just the tech, because tech always is married to process and policies and rules. And then what is the experience with our customers, right? Do we make it easy to buy from us? Is our contracting policies
Yeah. Barrier
easy,
free. Mhm.
right? And so now you have these inputs, the empathy-based business value inputs. If you could get all of those lined up and going in the right direction, and then you constantly listened, understood and predicted, act and learned for all four inputs, and then you repeated that, which the Odo loop is really repeating that, you can start to see where that wheel in the center of the Odo loop would start to spin. And it would spin so fast that at some point there'd be a breakthrough moment where now all the changes that you've made are actually giving you this empathy-based disruption.
Where does go ahead, Ralph.
Sorry.
Okay, I'll go. Where does scale enter into the discussion? To me, and I may be wrong about this, but my observation is that as businesses have gotten bigger and less locally based, less locally focused, empathy and the ability to relate to individuals or smaller groups of individuals has eroded. But there is an undeniable value to having a large business that can operate at an economy of scale. How do we balance that? Can it be balanced?
That's a really interesting question. So part of it is one of the things that I liked about my work at Hughes was we worked in what we called pods. So everybody had a homeroom, kind of like in high school. Or maybe your high school was organized like this. We had a homeroom, right, where we took attendance and, I don't know, did typing or something. And then we split off and we went to particular classes that kind of were in our major. We've gotten so far something. And then I think the same thing kind of happens at work, where we would, like, all the people from finance would then go work on multiple teams, right? On multiple different products. So on every team, you'd have somebody from finance, somebody from engineering, somebody from distribution, somebody from accounting department, somebody from design. So you'd have all the elements in a room at the same time on the team making decisions together. And so I think the concept of the pod makes a whole lot of sense, because it creates a smaller community where you can have those communications and have those discussions. And so I think that's one way to organize. I also think that technology can help us. So if we have the ability to be in communication, and on some days I do feel there's too many channels. There's IM, there's email, then LinkedIn, then there's the phone, there's texting, there's chat. I mean, there's almost too many channels. But as a company, maybe Slack. As a company, you want to figure out what are the easiest ways for people to just ask a quick question, so that you're not constantly having to set meetings. And I think there needs to be some way. So technology, is part of what and software has really enabled us to scale. But as we scale, we really want to use a design thinking approach, which the first step is empathy, sitting in the shoes of the people you're building that process and technology for. Is it serving the purpose that we thought it did? So in customer experience, for instance, and I was one of the people who, wrote all the white papers and said, oh, chatbots are going to, reduce call volume. Well, the reality is, when chatbots first came out, they were rule-based and they had no way to really listen. So they didn't have a way to ingest data and enrich it with AI to make it intelligent. So they were basically asking you very basic rule-based questions. They couldn't tell who you were. They couldn't tell you what you've been doing. They couldn't tell your intent. They couldn't tell your sentiment. So oftentimes, if you go on a website and you start to chat with a chatbot and it's giving you canned answers, it just makes you frustrated. And either if you've bought from the company, then maybe you're going to try to get resolution, but then you're like, I'm not going to go back there. So we have to be really careful, and I'm including that we as me, that when we start to develop technology, does it really, it sounds good when you say it fast. It sounds like if you could automate repetitive tasks, like please reset my password, or what's my balance, or where is my package? If you can automate those things, yes, it really does save time and money. But if the experience itself doesn't really get what the customer needs to get done, then it creates frustration, and that leads to a whole other cascade of things that aren't positive. So, when I was an analyst at Forrester and Constellation, I was writing all those ROI models and papers based on a corporate-based centric point of view. And from their point of view, theoretically, it should work like that. But if you went and asked customers, the experience was not so good. So it really wasn't doing
Right.
what the marketing said it was. And that's what I want to move away from. I want those of us who are in technology to acknowledge you need technology to scale, but you
Yeah.
also need to design technology with the people in mind and the experience it produces.
Preach.
And this is exactly what Winfried, our dear friend, said, even that he didn't catch up as early due to our little tricky problems with Facebook, which is his usually listening channel, that empathy needs organization and technology. And what I mentioned as a comment by myself is we need to go away in the attitude from Denver Clan and Dallas by hitting people or being in the caveman style. Yeah, you don't agree with me. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Yeah, but we need the one who is embracing you, hugging you, and say, "Hey, I'm grateful that you have a positive attitude in making us better." And my expectation is that they are open-minded and not criticizing just to do some criticism, but they want to bring things forward in the sense of benefit for the customer, benefit for the employee, make things smoother, easier, and create, even if it sounds crazy, create some special happiness. And that happiness is the key differentiator. We agree that service is so important. Good service is such important piece of benefit giving, yeah, and sharing. This is, I have to stop myself. But it's what,
It's good. I mean, I think you're right. It's like, so let's say that you and I were having a conversation. You came to me and you said, Nat, something about, our interaction is not working. And I say, wow, okay, tell me more about that. And we have this discussion and you contribute, right? So in that contribution, if it's really authentic and genuine, you're helping me be a better person. You're helping me grow. You're helping me see things I can't see, my blind spots. And in that interaction, how cool is that, right? So if you could have conversations like that every single day with people in your life, and they could appreciate
genau,
what you're giving, right? And that I could be receptive to what you're saying and be grateful to you for being honest and genuine. And you would have that sense of, I made a difference in somebody's life today, right? Then that self-fulfilling kind of feeling is like, wow, this is really cool. Like I made a difference in somebody and I made the relationship better.
Yeah.
This is what I'm talking about, but it's so hard to get people to open up, right? And to be authentic in corporate America, because I think we've been taught to be polite and to be nice, and that there are certain things you can't say. And I say them anyways. I mean, I end my emails with hearts, exclamation points, right? And it's not normal. And I know, but that's me.
And we are better for having you.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
we are honestly very great. Just speaking for myself, I love that book. It touched me, and I had twice speed reading and once carefully reading, and therefore I was not catching up the UUDA. So that I was very in repeating and stepping back, going forward. Have I understood it right? Because even that it's written in a easy to understand language and that you are shouting out to, hey, make it happen, just practice it. Yeah. And this is why I asked if there is the model of, or that there is a model behind it in a certain way. And I asked for the conflict-free communication, because the abbreviation in German is GFK, gewaltfreie Kommunikation, conflict-free communication. And my sons were touched when I suddenly came with these large maps of the dinosaur, the rhino, a giraffe, and some other animals, which they utilize in trainings. And they had these trainings. They said, this is important to me. And they introduced to our family a new way in setting some rules which are hanging in the kitchen. We have interactions where there is, such as every Christmas we talk about the last year and what we are having for positive expectations for the next year. Yeah.
Can I come to your house for Christmas? I would love that. That
Be
sounds
my guest
that would be
and
fantastic.
imagine how crazy that was when we were in Costa Rica, where the fiance of my eldest is from Latin America, and we visited, as we had the chance, with nearly the whole family. We went over to Costa Rica and joined them, so that we have, even that they were not getting married at that time, which they plan, we had the introduction. And that is what I love, that you have that spirit, that mindset. And even if you are challenged by the different languages and you have some barriers, you find the ways to communicate. Yeah.
Talking about communication. Sorry if I interfered. There is an audience question.
Only
Before
one?
Ralph gets over the top with this excitement.
Okay, it's the question: technology sometimes leads to poor user experience. Is the
Yeah.
mindset and culture the driver for
Yeah.
proper experience management? So poor user experience, to me, starts with that's bad CX design or EX design, right? So where does that start? That starts from somebody in management doesn't understand design thinking. If you understand design thinking, then you would pay for someone to come in and test that user experience or design it from the end user's point of view. But I can tell you, I've been in lots of companies where that seems like a kumbaya factor, right? To me, like, if you don't start there, just don't even do it. But those are the things. And when I was a management consultant, change management was another kumbaya thing. So sometimes we would put training, communication, and alignment, workshops for the executives, and we put them as line items. And then what we found was they would cross them out. It'd be $10,000, $20,000, but they'd cross them out because they could cross something out. So what we did was we just integrated it into this is how we deliver, and we never did it as a line item. The difference between using the principles like organizational change or design thinking as part of our process, the projects were on time, they're within budget and within scale. So what's fascinating is somehow the zeitgeist in corporate America, and maybe in other parts of the world too, is that these things that seem like soft or seem like nice to have are really truly the place to start. And I don't know if you've ever seen the History Channel has this really cool series called The Titans Who Built America. And they go all the way back to the late 1890s, early 1900s. Everything. So you went from this like horse and buggy, horse and plow kind of culture to big machines, right?
Yeah.
And so you went from, like producing, I don't know, I'm making this up, 10 ears of corn to 100,000 ears of corn, right? And so that drive for efficiency and effectiveness was really like what drove that entrepreneurial spirit. And in some ways it's fantastic, right? Because we would not have, the industrial nations that we have and all the things that we have, like us being able to do, like who made the microphones, who made the camera, who made the laptop, like all this stuff came from the evolution of that, right? So not saying I don't appreciate it, but what I think has happened is, 100, 125, 150 years later, our society, our zeitgeist, our psyche, who we are as people, what we expect and what we need and what we want, and our ability to be honest with ourselves, at least, about that is very different than then. And so what I think that means is that corporate leaders need to understand the world changed. People want something different. And if there was anything that the pandemic has taught us, one of it is that we really need to look at the people who work for us, right? And part of the Great Resignation is a lot of people got to have some time off, or the pace at which we were all living just pretty much slowed down almost to a halt, right? From like
Yeah.
me being on a plane every single week to me not being on a plane for 2 years. Like that's dramatically different, right? But in that extra time, I got to start to think about, okay, what's important to me? What do I want my life
Yeah.
to look like? Where do I want to live? What, how do I want to interface with people? And I think that Cause for Pause gave a lot of people that. And so while we were heading in that direction, this is really a tipping point. And so companies really need to look at how are they treating those employees? What are the comp packages look like? What about time off? What about, do we have enough people? We may be growing. If we're growing, are we sharing that wealth with the employees? Or are they, I had a conversation the other day with someone who is working really, really hard, right? And they're waiting for the promotion, they're waiting for the raise, and they think they should just be given a spot bonus because, and I think so too, right? Because what they did was amazing. And they're like, and they keep asking, and it's kind of like, and you guys may or may not relate to this, but the girls will, is if you're dating someone and you say, I really like roses. It'd be really nice to have roses.
Yeah.
Did you see they had a sale on roses?
Latest the third time, you better get some roses,
Right.
or
right.
you are dust.
Or it's like when she's leaving around copies of Modern Bride magazine. So you buy her a 5-year subscription for her birthday. Not quite getting it.
Yeah, it's like, yeah.
It is
So
like
it's that feedback, right? You're like leaving hints, you're leaving clues. And I think when after a while you kind of feel like you're this gerbil on the gerbil wheel, and then you wake up and you go, oh, I'm working really, really hard and I'm going to get a 2% raise and inflation is 5. So why am I working so hard?
bingo.
Yeah.
And before that
we go
question
further.
arises, Entschuldigung, timekeeper.
Yeah, before we go any further, we are at the top of the hour, but we started a bit late and had some technical issues. Do you have time to stick around and keep talking? We're
Sure.
clearly
I could talk to you all day. This is fantastic.
Okay.
This is exactly
You're
what
my
I wanted
peeps.
to hear.
You're my peeps. You get it. Like I love
Right.
talking to people who get
Right
it.
answer, Natalie.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Who's happier than
Like we have
Empathy.
tried and tested it. As
Sorry
I
to
said,
interrupt.
your book touched me very much, and I'm very curious about, as you wrote more than one time, that you see this as a shout out to the community, to the shout out to business leaders, and that you quoted that report I hadn't a clue of, where a lot of big shots sat together and said, it's changing. We have to do and rethink our economical approach. Did you find, as the book is just released, some early listeners which are getting into action?
Yes. So that's the encouraging part. So I think part of it is, well, I didn't really know, right? You don't know why people aren't changing. And so as kind of like the spokesperson, or, like the face of the change, going out there and talking to people, I wondered, is it really that they don't care, or is it they don't want to? And what I found was they really don't know what they don't know. And I'm really glad that we included the blind spots, because I really think that this conversation is a blind spot for most of corporate America. I would say probably most people in corporate America listening to this go, I totally agree with those guys, but how do they act when they're there, right? As a leader, as an employee, do the leaders even feel like they have the ability to lead like this, right? I mean, Tony does, but a lot of leaders don't, right? Or they haven't even thought about leading like this because they were enculturated and brought up through the system in a certain way. And this is what leaders look like, and this is how leaders lead, and these are the words that we say, and this is what's going to get you promoted, and this is what's going to make your investors happy, or Wall Street happy, or your board happy, right? And so to like stop and go, you know what? I'm changing course. I'm going to be a different kind of leader, and here's how I'm going to do it, and here's how I'm going to run my company. That's a big step. It takes a lot of courage.
Yeah.
So we do, what I found interesting was if I can get someone, if I can pique someone's interest, and I can, sometimes I talk about the employees and customers not being on the P&L, and yet their experiences are the thing that are building the P&L, right? It's whether your profit or loss statement is based on those two assets. If I can hook them with that conversation, or I can get them to start to see, and this is a technique we used a long time ago in contact centers, is we'd actually have calls come in. We'd have a bunch of executives at the table. We'd have calls come into the room, and we'd listen to an authentic, true call. And they'd be like, that's not really happening. Did they set this up? Like, you could see them IMing each other. Like, is this like, did they like, this is like a mock thing? And I'm like, no, this is happening right now in your contact center. This is how your customers are being talked to. This is, and the agent's like, oh, well, I'm sorry, but my technology is really slow today. My database is hung up, right? Like all the things that happen, right? That
That's what you
happen
hear
to
all
us
the
as
time. Yeah.
customers. And then they're like, oh my, and then, so it's kind of like learning how to reveal the dirty laundry, or what I would say the gold, or the canary in the coal mine, is helping people see what they don't know that they don't know, and then having a little bit of a solution and saying, well, what if we considered this? How might that change? And what's also been really fascinating, and you guys tell me your experience, is if people read the book, they kind of get it. But when they talk to me, they're like, oh, now I really, really get it. So I'd like to know from your point of view, did having a discussion about this open up new ideas or new thoughts? Did you pretty much get what I was trying to say, or did a conversation help?
Again, why can't it be both?
Well, so that's what
There's a
I
value.
think
There's value in the book. There's a
Yeah.
value in the talk. They go well together.
Yeah.
I
That
honestly,
might not be a useful answer for you.
no. For
But-
me, so as an educator, as a teacher, right? Because I teach at UCLA, I would want people to read so they'd have some basis, some foundation, right? Because they're coming to the conversation with preconceived notions. So I need to set some sort of baseline, right? So I think the book, or certain chapters or sections of the book, set a baseline of here's what we're talking about, right? And then one of the things that is happening at Genesis is we actually have employee book clubs. And so I'm going and speaking to the employee book clubs because, right, they're reading it, but they're reading it through their eyeballs, right? And through their perspective, and through how they've been in corporate America cultures, right? And how we've sold software to the world, right? And it's all of us, right, myself included, had a very business-centric approach, right? And so now to sit back and let's say, okay, we're going to have a different kind of conversation. Here's what I meant. Here's what Tony and I were thinking when we put these concepts together. How does that land for you? How is that different than what you're experiencing now? And start having a conversation.
This basically brings me back to something that's very fundamental as a question. It's the definition of empathy, and in times of automation, in how far can empathy be automated or exhibited, let's say exhibited by a machine?
That's a very good question. So I would say another reason why customer experience or customer service has been so robotic is because we were using machines based on rules, and then we were using machines based on rules with some AI, but it was experience automation. It wasn't experience orchestration. So the difference is let's say you're on a website, you're authenticated, it's Amazon, it's U-Haul, it's place that you shop, right? With the new technology, we can now see who that person is. We can look them up. We can see what they're looking at. Let's say they're going to rent a truck, and you see them put it in the cart, and then you can see that they went to the FAQs and they're trying to size the load and how big of a truck do they need, and you can see where they're going. if they reach out for help at that point, you don't have to say, "Hi, who are you?" "Oh, your name is Thomas." "Thomas, have you ever bought anything from us before?" Right? "Thomas, what are you looking at? What are you looking to do?" Well, no, we have all that data. So we can pull all that customer event data. We can enrich it and stitch it together with other data, and we can start to see what you're doing. So I can say, "Thomas, I see that you're moving to San Francisco and it looks like you're trying to size a truck. Is that what you need help with?" You're like, "Bang. Yeah." Help. I'm not, I have 2.5 bedrooms. I don't know if I need this size of truck or this size of truck, and I might sell some stuff. How do I estimate this? Can I reserve this? But what if I need that at the last minute? Like all these things, right? So that, and in many instances, a bot that's intelligent, right, that's enriched with data, has the ability to start to do what we call predict, and have a very high probability of what you might do next, or the next best action, or the next best piece of information that you might need. And the bots are getting pretty intelligent now, where they can look at that historical, long-term and short-term historical information about you and predict. And many times, if the bot is smart enough, it's going to know, you know what, you really need a conversation with a live person, and it's going to suggest to talk to an agent. And what's really cool now is all that interaction that you just had, which is now enabled by data and AI, is then sent to the agent, so that the agent has all the information and can get right to the point. And that does two things. One is it reduces the customer frustration. What I always thought was funny was that companies wanted to make average handle time shorter, right? But then they didn't have any way to collect all this information. So most of the conversation was, you or I telling our story, right? Now all that stuff can be collected. The agent can get right to what you need. And if you don't need anything else, now we've cut off, out of a 6-minute call, we've cut off 3 minutes. And that so you could do a shorter average handle time. Or let's say that there are other things, like maybe the moving company can recommend some good restaurants or hotels. Maybe they have relationships with hotels and restaurants. It can recommend, cool places or things to do on my trip from San Francisco to Indiana, right? And they could build more of a relationship and help me out, and maybe make some money, or maybe not make some money, but maybe make a friend or a customer for life. So that extra 3 minutes out of a 6-minute interaction, it's either turns into a 3-minute interaction because we got right to the point, or we build the relationship, which then creates that stickiness with the customer. So can empathy be imbued by technology? Not exactly in the same way as human beings. I don't know if we'll ever really get to artificial intelligence that can really cognate. I think machine learning is getting better, computational analysis is getting better, but to really have that ability to mimic the ears and the thought process in a brain, I don't think we're there yet. Are we much better than we have been? Absolutely. And I would say one of the reasons experiences have been so bad is it's only now, with exponential technologies, with cloud, with these advances in AI and digital, that we can really stitch and enrich our data with AI, have it follow that customer journey path, and inform the company of what you're trying to do, and provide the intelligence that's really needed to be able to provide a better experience. So what's fascinating to me is, in so many ways, we're hitting tipping points. We're hitting tipping points on technology. We're hitting tipping points on, the Great Resignation. I think that those things are pushing the questions of financial, because there are some companies that are not doing well, right? There are other companies that are doing amazingly well. And part of that is a customer-centric focus. I think the next wave in the Great Resignation is going to be customers leaving, right? So I think that you have this whole set of employees that said, I don't want to wait tables anymore, right? Customers are rude, and I get paid nothing, and I'm not going to do this job. And I know when I go to a restaurant now, you wait 20 or 30 minutes for a table, not because there's not empty tables. There's empty tables. There's nobody to serve you. right? So they're in. Personally, I'd rather just be served and sit there and drink ice water than stand, but that's a whole other zeitgeist of looking at it from my point of view. And I think you're going to have a whole bunch of people in corporate America in, regular jobs just going, is this really what I want to do with my life? And I think that's going to affect the financial equation. And so when customers leave and when employees leave, then that does open up this discussion about, oops, we're not making money. We can't run our company. We need to do something different. Now, what different things might we do? And what I'm hoping is to be that canary in the coal mine and say, please pay attention now. Don't wait for the bridge to fall down, because once it's fallen, it's a pain in the butt to pick up the pieces and reconstruct it.
Yeah. Ask the German Ministry for Autobahns, streets, and all that. They have an infrastructure which is breaking down. They have to redo all the bridges they have built after World War II, and they are all rotten. And this is more than investing one time some billions of euros. Do you see, you said you have observed organizations which have taken the activity up. Are they large or more smaller or medium-sized?
It's not really about size. It's about who can hear this conversation. So, right? Who can actually hear what we're saying? So sometimes those people are people who are climbers, who want to do something big in their company, and they go, oh, shiny object, I'm going to go chase that, right? So they're the shiny object chasers, right? And they do change things. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, just is. And then there are people who have been sitting in corporate America and feeling angst and cognitive dissonance and frustration and are just so sick of the way we have done things that when someone brings a fresh perspective, they're like, oh my God, she said it out loud. She's telling the truth. She's not sugarcoating this, right? And so for the people who are brave enough to hear that conversation and to raise their hand and say, I want to know more. And there are not a lot of them, right? So it kind of follows that distribution curve of the innovators and the early majority, right? Those kind of people who are thinking different, and sometimes for their own reasons, or because they're really truly like us. They're just tired of, they just can't imagine going another day with things the way they are. And they have really no idea what to do differently. And there's no spokesperson out there saying this doesn't work. And so as I speak to customers, some customers their reaction is, oh, well, what Nat's saying is really nice, but what I really need is a chatbot.
Bring back Clippy. That's what we need.
Right?
As long as it's exhibiting empathy, why not?
Well, and not all of them do, right? So if you buy a chatbot in isolation and it's not part of an experience orchestration platform, right? So that it can be integrated with SMS and Facebook and social and your CRM and aggregated with additional data, and then that bot is intelligized, if you will, with AI, and then you can pass that on to the agent, and then you can pass that on the record, and then you use the OTA loop to learn from all those. Like integrating a chatbot into your current solution will get you more of what you already have, which is okay experiences. Right. And that's the point. And there's lots of customers who don't want to hear this like new world, like the world's changed and, Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall and you better be careful because you're going to fall off the wall too. Some people are just like, no, I'm going really fast. I need a chatbot. I need, new routing. We already have all that other stuff that you said, or we think we do, or I don't really care if you do. My boss wants me to get this, so I need to get this done. Right. And there are people who are running so fast and so hard, and they're not going to buck the system. They're not going to say anything. They're not going to go up against their boss. They're just going to do what they're going to do.
How you just said it's the early part, the not the early majority, I think is what you said.
The
So now
innovators are early majority mostly.
putting that together with Christensen, what needs to happen in order to make the industry as such, or the industries as such, crossing the chasm? This time I got it right, Marshall.
Yes, crossing
Chasm,
the chasm.
not chasm.
Could be chazzy.
He's learning. I feel good.
So a couple of my favorite guys. Geoffrey Moore is crossing the chasm.
Mhm.
Clayton Christensen is the one who says, "Is that me? I hope it's not me. It probably is me. Go
Stop
away."
being-
Okay, sorry.
Job to be done.
The job to be done. Thank you for picking that up for me.
Cat is calling you.
Yeah, the cat is calling me because I made her get off her lap. She's
Mhm.
like, "But I want to be in the interview." So Clayton Christensen asks, "What is the job to be done?" So he's one of
Mhm.
my favorite people. Even though he's passed on, I love his work. So we have, a couple of amazing things that we're trying to bring together into the book. And to be able to cross that chasm, we as a company, as Genesis, we have to really sit in the shoes of our customers and our employees. And that's part of Peter Graff is leading what's called the Experience Index. And that's really our attempt to look at experiences through other audiences' eyes, understand what that is, and start to really collect KPIs and change those things. Because there's no company on the planet, ours included, that's perfect. And the point is, it's not about being perfect. It's about caring about asking the question. It's about being curious. It's about changing things. So I think part of that is needing executives to be curious and interested in the conversation. And it's the nature of the people who are in the innovators and the early adopters, their nature is curious. They're like, if you did like a Myers-Briggs kind of makeup or disc breakup, you'd look at those people who fall into those characteristics as people who were the people who are always asking questions. And then the people in the early and late majority are kind of like, show me, right? It's all like they're from Missouri, from the show me state. It's, they're like, well, I want to see who else is doing it, and I want to see the ROI model. So they're more conservative in their approach. And they make up about 65%, if these theories are true, about 65% of corporate America's. And then there's the laggards who you're never gonna get to come on board, but we don't care about them, right? Because you can't get everybody to come on the ship with you. So your goal, or my goal, is to be able to have conversations with you guys. And I would say you fall in the innovator early adopter, right? Because you can hear the conversation. You were excited about talking about the book, so much so that you chased me down and said, could we do a podcast? And I kept putting you off, so I apologize. But so when I can find those people, then I have an audience. And then those people are the ones where I'm going to start my nucleus of success and prove that the theory works. And then the people in the early and late majorities will go, oh, well, what are you doing over there? That looks kind of cool.
The proof of concept is one thing. Do you have also observed a certain typology, like you mentioned the climber for success, for the shiny opportunity? Have you seen some other typos or types, going for the job to be done picture? There might be a persona or something like that. Who will jump on the positive aspects of empathy in action?
I think it's the people who are students of Clayton or students of Deming, right? Because Clayton and Deming are really saying the same thing. Deming was all about quality, right? And he was about looking at the quality from the customer's point of view. And I have a story when I worked for an automotive company. I was an engineer then. And they asked me, it's really expensive to do two-sided galvanizing. So can you do some corrosion tests and see if we can get away with one? And I'm like, well, I know the answer. The answer is no. But they're like, well, just do the experiment anyway. So I do the experiment. It corrodes. So I bring my data, show them the samples, the holes. And so they go, okay, thank you very much. And I said, well, wait, I'd like to know what you're going to do. And they're like, you do? You want to know? And I'm like, yeah. And they go, well, we're going to go with one-sided galvanizing. And I'm like, why? And they're like, what do you mean why? And I go, well, aren't you concerned about the brand and that we're going to have and I was living in Detroit, Michigan then, right? So there's rain and snow and ice, and that's Motor City. I said, we're going to have cars driving around with holes in the sides. And they're like, why do you care? And I'm like, what do you mean, why do I care? And they're like, but you're an engineer. Why do you care? And I'm like, you're executives. Why don't you care?
Yes.
Right?
I could imagine a bunch of reasons why being associated with the brand, being part of doing it.
Planned
My head would
obsolescence.
explode. Yeah.
But as a young engineer, just graduated from University of Michigan, all proud with my degree, hanging on the wall, thinking I'm making a difference. And then you get that kind of response. You're like, whoa, this is like messing with my brain.
Yeah.
So it's those people who, like I have spent my whole life in corporate America going, this doesn't make sense, right? And so identifying myself as a entrepreneur, which is not, it's not, I'm not an entrepreneur, like external, like start my own company, right? Founder, but I like to do those things inside of large companies. So what I found was I'm an innovator and an early adopter. And so when you can connect to people who go, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense, or a student of Deming, or a student of Clayton who says, what is the job to be done, or a student of design thinking, right? It's those people who have that natural tendency to think about, right, this doesn't make sense. Those are the people that you can get audiences with that aren't just, the shiny object chasers and the climbers, but people who have had this sense of how they'd like to see things done or what would make them proud to be part of. It's those people, that kind of personality. And then, like what's interesting about what Geoffrey Moore says, there's a really cool video that I used to use in one of my classes, and it's a guy dancing on a hill. And he's like dancing by himself, and people are walking by and they're looking. I'm like, what is wrong with that guy? He's like dancing all by himself. And then somebody stands up and starts dancing with him. And then a couple more people start dancing. And then all of a sudden, all these people start dancing, right? And it's like the coolest natural example of how crossing the chasm works, where there's always those few lone people that are kind of like the crazy ones, right? In that old Apple commercial, that are out there holding the flag and dancing by themselves, having an amazing time, right? And kind of look crazy. And then a couple people join them, and a couple more people join them, to the point where you go, wow, what's happening over there? That looks like a fun party. I want to go do that. And so that's the invitation.
I feel very much remembered, not only to the Ford Pinto scandal and Nader, but I feel remembered to United Breaks guitars. If you don't listen to the customer, I get you in front of your customers. Trust me, with the matters and the means I do have. And honestly, I'm a very peaceful person normally, so I prefer making a song and get it distributed and just feel good that I have talked to the audience, to the big bosses, but I trust he hasn't thought of what kind of impact that would make. But this, after several other issues, is exactly what I'm expecting, that if people get this into their head, this could happen to us. This is ruining the brand. This is causing a lot of trouble. And rethink instead of shareholder value and pocket in my money, just the Sridhar Vembu approach of, why don't I spread a rural approach? Or why don't I do it in a different way? And I will make my money slower, a little less impactful, but I will have impact on a lot of other things. And he is not a shareholder's company. He is his own company. And I thought that by reading several passages, that the dilemma is a bit those which are jumping for Wall Street and looking for the banks and for the do-do-dootsie, you made it nicely, instead of, okay, I take a different road. I go somewhere outside in the landscape. I'm not in one of these shiny glass towers anymore. You think there is a chance that we find
So I'm going to challenge you, and I'm going to say, I think that you can make more money faster if you do this. And here's why. Employee attrition costs a lot of money. So if you have bad employee experiences and your employees are leaving and you have to replace them, even though it's not on your balance sheet, you're spending a lot on attrition. If you have employees who are not productive, you're paying them for work they're not doing. Now, if you have customers who don't buy, who don't want to keep buying, now you have no money coming in. And what I'm trying to say is, if you took those 4 inputs and you said, even if you made small changes to culture, to leadership, to finances, and you started to think about that, and then you started to do the ODA loop, listen, understand, predict, act, and learn, and just pick one piece of your business that is like something that maybe it's contracting, maybe it's onboarding, whatever it is, like in your business, take that one little piece of your business and improve that. And what I really think, because the world moves so fast today, and technology can accelerate these changes really, really quickly. Yeah, you might have to slow down to go fast, but I think if you make this part of your practice, you can actually make money faster and better. And that's part of I think people think, because and I trace this back to when I was a management consultant. So when I was doing that, it would take a large company 3 to 5 years to implement a CRM system, Siebel, SAP, right? So when people think about large transformation, they think 3 to 5 years, and they think about the $500 million they spent on a CRM project that went belly up. And so they're thinking that's what Nat's saying. That's not what I'm saying, right? This is a much simpler transformation of management thinking and leadership, which you can do that in a couple of months with a really good facilitator and somebody who really knows how to get alignment and get people to go in a new direction. Starting to look at the technology that you're buying. Are you buying like pieces and duct taping them together and trying to configure them, and then realizing, when you try to do the upgrade, like things break, like those kind of point solution systems don't work anymore. You really need a systematic platform, right, for it to really work together at the speed at which, and at the intelligence at which we want it to work, right? Either we as employees, we want the information so we can get our job done, or we as customers want you to have the information so you can help us. That requires an experience orchestration platform, right? So in a contact center, there are 30 to 50 vendors in there, and all the stuff, like if you ever look at a schematic, an IT schematic, it looks like a horrible dish of spaghetti, like with meatballs here and red peppers here, and it just looks like a mess, right? And
that's why I don't look at IT schematics.
Right, and you sprinkle some cheese on top to make it look pretty, right?
Look at them as pieces of art.
Right, exactly. They look like a Jackson Pollock picture. So I think that even though it feels like, because our experience of going through transformation, and what it sounds like is this is a really big transformation project. Our experience of transformation came from systems integrators and technology, relational based technology, that was really difficult to, it wasn't in the cloud for the most part. It was on-prem. It was, prior, like their own special flavor, and it didn't integrate with anything else, proprietary, customized. So we're coming to this conversation thinking it's going to take all that. And what I'm saying is, if you really had good organizational change and you really had leadership that understood this conversation and was motivated, I don't believe that the changes would be that difficult. And the whole point of the flywheel is to say, if you have some of these, at least in one area of your business, and you do it repeatedly and you make improvements, right, to both customer and employee experience, you're going to get a result. So do a pilot somewhere in your organization and test it and call me, because I want to know.
Now that we have had the wheel repeatedly, how do you differentiate it from PD, from the plan, do, check, act circle, which is on the outside looks fairly similar?
It is very similar, right? So there are really no new ideas. And so the concept there is to look at anything that's going to give you momentum, right? So whatever you put like on your wheel, you know, it kind of, it's a flywheel, right? So I mean, it comes to the concept of kind of a water wheel, right? And you add more water and then it goes faster and faster and faster. So I think the real difference is the things that I'm putting on my wheel, but I don't think the concept of the flywheel is different. It's just my way of explaining what I think needs to happen, which is that the flywheel is really about taking in feedback and using it and learning from it, right? So really listening, really going, okay, I'm not just hearing things, but I'm understanding it to the point where now I'm going to change my behavior. I'm going to change the decisions I'm making. I'm going to change how I spend my money. I'm going to change my policies in hiring and compensation. I'm going to change, you know, and make sure we have UX design, right? So, and then I'm going to learn from all those changes, and I'm going to keep doing that, right? I'm going to keep repeating that. Like that's the way like if you started every meeting with, how is this conversation that we're about to have going to help our employees or customers, right? And if it's not, why are we having it? Or how do we reorient it so the outcome is that? And then if you use those 4 empathy pillars as the way to construct the conversation. So, okay, we're going to listen. Now we're going to understand and predict. So maybe that's our kind of discussion. And then we're going to decide, okay, based on all this input that we have, what actions do we want to take? So let's make an action item. Then people are now responsible for those action items. Now let's go do that. And then next week when we come back, tell us what happened when you did that. Did it work? Did it not work? Were our assumptions correct? Where were they off? What could we do better? So we start again at listening. Then we like take all that information in. Then we have a new understanding of reality. Now we take new actions. Then we go out there, we do it, and we learn from it. And if you keep repeating that and you get quicker and quicker and quicker at this, and you have more and more people, because most people come to a meeting and they're like, yeah, okay. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get to my action items. Yeah, I'll do them next week. Oh, that budget, I'm sorry, I didn't get to look at that. Right. So the meeting, half of the meeting is a waste. Right. So why is that happening? Maybe it's because you're understaffed, or maybe because your, employees are not motivated. So people show up to meetings, and how much of that meeting is really spent on transforming something that's going to really forward the, and I don't want to say this like in a way that sounds like I'm all about the money, because I'm not. But if you don't have money, if the business doesn't make money, then you can't pay your employees better. You can't make better products. You can't have the technologies and the ways of serving customers. So fundamentally, you have to make money. So how are we forwarding the customer and employee experience so that we can make more money, so we can be more successful, so that we can be a company that walks our talk, right? So if you look at Nordstrom's, or you look at Ritz-Carlton, or you look at what, are like luxury brands, that's how they run their company. And when I talk to other companies, they're like, well, yeah, we're like Costco, right? So we don't necessarily have that extra margin. But if you look at the experience at Costco, I mean, it is what it is, right? And going in, it's a box store, right? And you're going to buy 10,000 rolls of toilet paper and share them with all your neighbors, hopefully, if you're a nice person.
How do companies like Amazon fit in there?
Amazon,
because I could now say, just put it in quotes, they couldn't care much less about their employees, and still they are quite successful.
So what I would say is that what I know about the beginnings of Amazon was that what they did was they had what they call customer advocates.
Mhm.
And they had people who would ask every single day, kind of like this empathy
Yeah.
ODA loop.
Yeah.
And they would say, how does this work? Do you like this?
Mhm.
They changed the user interface, they changed the experience, they changed
Mhm.
shipping, right? And they did that and they did that and
Mhm.
they honed that over years and years and years.
Mhm.
What they haven't done, and this is why when we wrote the book, so what happens in a lot of, whether it's a consultancy, whether it's analyst firm, whether it's people selling software, people only look at half of the equation. So
Genau.
one of the articles that I really, really appreciate was by Robert McKay, and he built a financial model for customer experience, right? This is the Harvard Business Review. Are you undervaluing customers? And it's a very, very good article. What Robert doesn't have in that model is employees. It's all about customer value, which is great, right? And you could almost cut and paste a similar model for employees. So what we did in the book was we said, it's not just about the experience of the customer, it's about the experience of the employee. And when you put these two together, now you have the magic sauce that you cannot separate them. But companies do all the time. I mean, even when I was an analyst, we had people working on like analysts who covered user interface design, and we had people covering customer experience, and we had people covering CRM, and we had people covering the future of work. And rarely did we ever collaborate.
Which is
And
crazy.
it's crazy, right? Because it doesn't work separately like that. And it's part of it is the system of science, right? So in the beginning, we knew very little. Let's say you're going to be a doctor. We knew very little about the human body. And so medical school was like this overall, like, here's how it kind of works. And then we went down this area of specialization. So you have cardiologists and you have urologists and you have all these different specialties. And what we're looking at now in modern medicine is how do we connect what all those doctors know in a systematic way so we can treat you holistically. And that's really what's known as functional medicine today, right? But so what we've done as a society or zeitgeist is we've gotten so specialized that we forget the system that it's a part of, and we treat the part just like I want a chatbot or, something, I have kidney stones, but like what caused the kidney stone? Like what else in your system is not really working that's out of balance probably, right, that you might want to address. So I think, the same thing kind of happens in corporations where we're talking about one piece of the equation, but and I think the customer experience gets talked about a lot. I don't think the employee experience gets talked about very much. But what's interesting, timing again, right, is the Great Resignation. Is going to push this employee conversation to the forefront because people are, quitting their jobs. So that's going to have a major financial impact on companies if you don't have any employees. Or you don't have the top talent. So I think there's different ways. There's people who retired in the Great Resignation or who just said, you know what, I have enough money. I'm sick of this. I got a chance to see what it would be like to not have to face the rat race. I'm going to retire. Then you have people who didn't like the job that they had for whatever reason, didn't like where they lived. It was too expensive. They moved home. They moved somewhere else. I think the next wave of people are going to be the top talent in these companies who have been the engines, who have been the people like working really, really hard to make sure that the company stays in business and does well. And now they're like, whew, we did it. We seem to be through some of the worst times. I'm really tired. Where's my reward?
Yeah.
And nobody's thinking these people need to be rewarded for the heroic thing that they just did. And so they're going to be like, okay, well, you're going to give me a 3 or 5% raise.
The cynic employer mind says, well, they are rewarded because they are paid for exactly that.
My attitude is different.
I hear you.
Yeah, no,
and there's a lot.
The cynic employer mind.
It's okay. But we had in the Corona, we had people from the board clapping their hand, a lot of applause, but no extra money. that is exactly the description of what you gave me. Yeah? And Vinny is a very big fan of the school from Clayton Christensen, and he's a very fond and fan of the empathy drive. So I'm very clearly seeing forward that he will get, as he is a big driver on driving employee experience forward, that this is one of the push buttons that he is just driving with that impact of making empathy coming into action, and that there is another brick for the building one has to create.
Well, I think part of the problem with employees wanting recognition, part of it is people want to hear thank you.
Yeah.
But
Appreciation
thank
and
you,
respect.
appreciation, right, and respect, and which I think is really important. It doesn't happen enough. The other part is the way that compensation is structured. So as a manager, say you have 100 employees and you have, I don't know, $100, right, to give that 100 people. So you have to take that $100 and figure out what's the distribution, right? And that's what you're given, right? So looking from their point of view, they're going to give some people more and some people less, some people nothing, right? So they're going to take that and distribute it. And I think part of the way that if your comp structure is built like that and the employees don't own part of the company, right? And there isn't a way to do dividend sharing or some sort of profit sharing, then you're very limited in your ability to give employees extra, right? Outside of that, unless, and this often happens, is that someone is a high performer and starts to look outside and then comes back to their boss and says, I'd really like this kind of promotion or this kind of raise. And they say, well, that's not possible. And they say, okay, well, I just wanted to let you know I have 2 offers from somewhere else. Oh, all of a sudden there's money, right? Because they don't want to lose that top talent. And so what I'm trying to say is, instead of waiting till your top talent is so fed up, how can you look at your comp structure? How can you look at profit sharing? How can you look at, I don't know, stock, or I don't know exactly. I can't pretend to prescribe what that thing might be, because then I wouldn't be empathetic. So I don't know what those employees want, right? I can probably tell you they don't want the elevators redecorated.
That depends on the redecoration, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, it could be
wallpapered in $50 bills. Yeah, sure.
But then you're surrounded by money you can't have. It's worse. Yeah, if you could rip it off, I don't know. Rush in the elevators. I think, it's an interesting thing, because I think as a boss, someone who's had employees and had, limited budget to give people raises, because it's structured, right? Like, okay, so here's the pocket of money and then it gets distributed down. Your hands are somewhat tied, but what I find frustrating is nobody says anything, right? Nobody says, well, or they do, but it's like, well, okay, well, it's just the way it is, right? And so what I'm really looking to inspire is people to go, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, right? We really need to find a different way to compensate our people, because they're the ones who pulled us through this like crazy time, and they're the ones that helped us grow. So how do we give back to them? And so if we're thinking inside of the way that comp is usually structured, if someone really wants a better position or a better role or more, people or employees, or a big jump in salary, right? Something that's actually going to affect their life, they have to leave. And I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. And the thing is, once somebody starts talking about leaving, it generally means that whether you keep them or not, they're not going to be there forever anyway. Once somebody starts saying, give me more money or I'm going to go, that means either they're going to go at some future point, or you're going to look for someone to replace them, because you know that they're
going
No,
anyways.
yeah, they're
Their
going to
heart's
go
not in
anyway.
it anymore. Their
Yeah,
heart's not in it anymore. Yeah, and I think
yeah. I
it's
think the
kind of
figure's
like,
like 6 months or something.
yeah. So it's kind of like the roses thing. Like, I was talking to a friend who his girlfriend broke up with him, and he was like, "I don't understand. I don't. Why doesn't she love me anymore?" And I'm like, "Okay, well, tell me some of the thing." And there was a conversation about roses, and he goes, "I don't get why she likes roses so much." And I'm like, people have different languages of appreciation or love,
Yeah.
right? And so if her language, her interpretation of how much you care about her is flowers, then that's what you need to give her. And he's like, but they die and it's stupid. And it's like, it doesn't really matter what you think. It matters what she thinks, right?
Mhm.
Well,
And
you don't
so
have to get it; you have to get them for her.
them, right? Because that's what she wants. So what I said was, the first time she said it out loud to you, there was a little chink in the relationship. The second time she said it, and so what I was trying to say was, if she has to say it a number of times, every time she says it, she's distancing herself, right? So
Mhm.
we leave before we leave. Like, we would start to
Yeah.
withdraw ourselves before we actually physically go, because to physically go, it's a big step, right?
Mhm.
Because we know, like, we have to go interview and we have to go get another job and we might have to move, and there's all these unknowns, right? So the devil you know is often
Yeah.
easier to deal with than the devil you don't. But the truth is, when our brain goes there, when our employees are starting to talk like that, there is a piece of their soul that's left. And so
Yeah.
that $10 that we talked about at the beginning of the conversation that you're paying them, you're not getting $10 worth back.
Mhm.
You are quitting from the inside first. Die innere Kündigung, it's called in Germany. And the inner goodbye is happening a lot earlier. And if you don't catch the signals, it's hard to recover.
Yeah.
Right. Because that person might, I mean, I know, I don't know how much this exists, but when I worked a long time ago at an automotive company, people collected their salary, right, at their big automotive job and their benefits, and they had businesses on the side.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
that's
to
how
survive.
they, right?
Mhm.
And that's how they, they had their security, but then they built businesses on the side, and nobody seemed to question it. I don't know how the culture is now, because I haven't worked in that industry in a long time, but I saw a lot of people being entrepreneurial on the side because they knew, like, it was great to have a salary, great to have benefits, great to buy cars at a discount, like all the perks that come with that particular job. But they knew that, and that was one of the reasons when I was at Hughes Electronics, it was interesting because I went from Hughes to PricewaterhouseCoopers as a management consultant and doubled my salary.
Mhm.
And when I went to tell my boss, I was like really afraid to tell him that I was leaving. And he's like, Nat, I'm surprised you're still here. And what a great move, because there's no way in 50 years of being here
Yeah.
you'd ever double your salary.
Yeah.
And he said,
Like,
I'm sorry to tell you that. You're brilliant, you're smart, and you're a woman in a culture of, like, we need women, and like, because it's 98% men. So we need to check that box.
yeah.
Even so, you'd never double your salary here.
Yeah.
So congratulations. I'm really happy for you. And that was a great boss, right?
Mm.
But
Yeah.
That makes him a great boss, basically. Even greater would have been if he had encouraged you to do so.
yeah.
Mm.
Well, I think he kind of knew, because we did have some kind of
Yeah.
discussions around that. But yeah, exactly. And it's hard for bosses, because they're like, if you're a really hard worker, then people don't want to lose you. But at the same time, if they know they can't really help you reach the career goals you have,
Mm.
then not everybody wants to move up. Some people just want a job where they come in, they do their job.
Yeah.
They're not trying to impress anybody. They're not trying to climb the ladder.
Yeah.
They just want to do a job, and they come home, and then, they have their family, or they have this things that they are more important to them. So not everybody is like that. But I think as a manager, you do need to know who those people
Mm.
are in your organization, and are they worth keeping? And then, talking to HR about how could we change the comp structure, or how can we, make it a culture where people are so excited, kind of like when I was talking to Libby over at Thrive, like being in a culture where you can speak your mind and you're not afraid, and there's psychological safety, that has intrinsic value that you cannot put a dollar amount on.
Yeah.
Which I thought it's really fascinating, right? Because sometimes you think it's about the money that you make, but sometimes it's the peace of mind that you have because you're in a culture where you're seen and heard and understood. And, when most cultures are not that genuinely authentic, that experience itself is amazing. And I see you, Thomas, that you're saying are we really at the 2 hour? Holy cow.
Yeah. Yeah. So
That is an interesting
technically
one.
we should have started at 10 Pacific.
Yeah,
We
like
are
2
approaching
hours
noon
and not
Pacific. So
slowing
this
down.
is
I don't know. I think we're going to have to do this again.
yes,
I think so.
most certainly.
Please.
Most certainly. Time really flew. So I just looked at the clock here and said, gosh, what is this? So,
I know I'm looking at my phone and all the people who are calling me, and I'm like, whoops. Sorry, folks. I will get back to you. Yeah, no, I mean, to me, it's such an interest. There's so many, like,
it is, yeah.
people will say, okay, well, what do you want to talk about, right? Like if I get interviewed, and I'm like, I don't know, because there's so much to cover, and there's so many things that I'm so passionate about, and there's so many aspects of this and how it would work and what would actually make it, like there's the theoretical idea of it, and then there's, how do we really implement this? And so it's for me, it's not a interview, it's a conversation, right? And it's conversations imply ongoingness. I don't think that you can have one conversation and no.
Yeah. Well, you've chosen a broad and ever renewing topic. Empathy in action. Empathy is the basis of human interaction, in my opinion, anyway. Yeah. So we are never going to run out of stuff to talk about with you, and I am thrilled.
We still get people hopping on.
And it is,
oh my God.
It is so fascinating. You asked about the pillows with the pillars.
I think that's a great idea. I think I'm going to encourage
you.
Somebody's got to make a t-shirt.
As I'm an educated trainer and I'm doing trainings with my kids together and solo, that having, for instance, some working cards, because in a group to get them into interaction, not only the book, not only the prep of a chapter, not only let them think about the exactly fantastic wheel, but get them some cards to interact, to play with, because through the gamification approach, we will have another learning impact and another appreciation and a call to action, such as, I really want to try this. I want if it's working. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I like the idea for like our lobbies to have the 4 pillows with the 4 pillars. Like I not necessarily take a nap, or maybe, but what if they were sitting there and people were like, why do they have pillows?
What is this here? And then they ask for a free copy of the book. And then they start, you really do this here in Genesis? Wow. And this works? And you make extra money? Wow. Bingo.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay.
So I'm going to dedicate the pillows to you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
See, and here's what's so cool about this. Unless we had a conversation about this, that idea might never have been born.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's in the conversation that the ideas and the changes and the collaboration, that in that co-creation creates something new.
And this is the buzzword bingo for Winfried, co-creation. It's a pity that he has to feed his daughter.
What a damn shame.
Okay. In order to leave plenty of stuff for a follow-up.
The next one!
Let's not open all those Pandora's boxes that we could open right now.
Okay.
Let some of them shut for the next time.
All right.
I think it's great. It's
Thanks,
really
guys.
great.
Yeah.
Except
you.
the technical problems that we had today. For example, me being on this shitty camera right now.
Well, and me not being camera ready.
So,
There
well,
was that, but
the good one that I have decided to shut off. Bloody thing.
oh,
So,
well, you look very
anyways,
handsome.
so I need to do, well, my learning is get a better backup.
Yes.
There
Oh,
is always plan
yeah.
B, but now we learn
Yeah.
that we need plan C as
Yeah,
well.
this is plan C. I need to get plan B. Okay.
Thank you
Interestingly
very,
enough,
very
we still also had a good audience, so we didn't scare them off. This is testament to how interesting this topic is.
Mm.
Yeah. And
And how compelling our guest is.
yes,
Aw.
Bingo.
how compellingly it
Well,
was
let's face it.
brought forward.
You're a good speaker. You're a good
Yeah.
writer.
Yeah. How,
Everybody knows your name.
how emphatically it got,
Yeah.
emphatically and empathically, both. The points got made.
Wow.
So let's continue soon. So
Okay.
let's just go backstage, say goodbye to the audience, and
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
audience.
Tschüss.